why don't we go ahead and, we've got a few people here. Let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Brian Rudolph. I'm the president of the Social Media Club of Atlanta. I know some of you have been to a Social Media Club event in the past, whether live or virtual, and some of you are new. So I'll take 2 minutes just to talk about Social Media Club. We are the Atlanta chapter of a global organization that's dedicated to all things around digital marketing and social media marketing more specifically. So education, networking, professional development, personal relationships. Those are the kind of things that we're really focused on. When things are normal, we have just about one meeting a month, and they flip back and forth between morning and evening meetings. Our morning meetings, like this format, are very informal. We call them coffee and content, and it's essentially anywhere from 20 to 30 people getting together in real life, whether it's, in this case it's on Zoom, but it's still real life, to talk about a topic. And I call these curated conversations because I do like to stack the deck with a number of subject matter experts. And we've already heard that a number of people here have podcasts running. So we've got an audience full of subject matter experts. But there's no presentation. This is just a bunch of people who want to learn about a topic or are knowledgeable about a topic, sharing information very informally. Once a quarter, we have a more formal event where we have a formal presentation, a brand gets up and does a case study, we have a panel of brand and agency marketers. However, right now we're not doing those because of the our current situation, but hopefully we will pick those up again. Maybe not this year, but if we kick off 2021 with a big event, Amanda's going to be very happy because she's our programming chair, right? So, all right. So let's start off the conversation. I wanted to start with a poll. So you should see that on your screen, and this will update live. So we'll get a sense of who's in the chat and what our comfort level is with people that are knowledgeable and professionally podcasting or semi-professionally, and some not. I'll leave it up for about 30 more seconds. So it's actually a pretty even balance I'm seeing. About half of us have podcasts or are, I say us, I actually don't have one. About half of the people in the room have podcasts, maybe a little bit less than half. And so it looks like about 60% either has one or is planning to have one pretty soon. So not a bad mix. All right, I'll end that. How do I share the results? Oh, okay, stop sharing. Oh, that's the same thing we just saw. Oh, did you guys see it live as it was going on? Okay, so here's
Got the results.
Yeah, we see the results, but we didn't see it live.
Oh, okay. Oh, that was kind of cool though. I saw it. A whole bunch of one line going up and then down, and then so they should show it. Yeah, they should show it live when the Zoom feature, some enhancement. Okay, so those were our results. So as you can see, it was a pretty even balance. What I'd like to do is kind of, I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to hand over the reins of this conversation to Jeremy. Jeremy is on the board of directors for Social Media Club Atlanta, and our communications chair, VP of Communications. And also, Jeremy, you run a podcast, right? So,
yep.
I wanted to hand the reins of the conversation over to you, and let's
Sure.
Talk about our process, talk about equipment, talk about monetization, distribution, recording, editing, publishing. There's lots to talk about.
Yeah, there really is. So, well, thank you, Brian, and good morning, everybody. As Brian mentioned, I help kind of co-host a podcast on USA Today's network, Sports Media Group Network. I'm a Buffalo Bills fan. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, and kind of help contribute to that Bills Wire site through a podcast, and have been doing that for about a year or so. A little bit of a side project of mine. Currently, I'm working at Cookerly Public Relations here in Atlanta, and we're primarily a crisis firm, but kind of heading the digital department for our agency. And so it's my pleasure to join everybody this morning. I wanted to start with kind of maybe talking about and asking you all a question to start. What maybe is your biggest challenge with podcasting? Is it trying to monetize? Is it trying to set up that first concept in terms of what you're looking to do? I just kind of wanted to throw it out to the group and have this be a conversation, a back and forth with you all. I wanted to start with, what is your biggest challenges, especially now in our current environment with podcasting? What are you all seeing? And then I was going to kind of get into maybe breaking down, how I kind of, in my 3 phases, go to attack to create a new podcast for some of you who have not done it but are thinking about doing so. But first, just wanted to toss it out to the group and see if anyone wanted to jump in and say, hey, right now I am really struggling with X, or really curious about how you all are doing this, and this. And so I hope that we can all learn from each other in this conversation. And just anyone who wants to jump in and kind of take the reins, I'd be appreciative of that. We can go from there.
Hi, I'll be happy to start. I'm sorry I don't have video, but I'm driving.
No worries.
My name is Daniela. I have a podcast that is about food. It's called Food Culture. I started it because I actually come from a background of being a radio personality and a radio host, and I'm a journalist. So I figured I wanted to do this as a hobby to kind of spread knowledge about the culture, history, and politics that go behind food. And it's to me, is very incredible. So I do a podcast on that. I didn't start too long ago. I started maybe just 2 months ago when I actually started doing my podcast through Zoom. And I think I'm just trying to figure out how to grow it and reach a broader audience to be able to get more ears to the information that I'm providing. I think that's what I'm experiencing right now, or what I'm trying to learn more about.
Sure. Yeah, that's really important. Obviously, we're Social Media Club, and social media is a great way to amplify your podcast and get more listeners to tune in. Does anyone have any tips or tricks that they've used to grow their audience? I think that's probably a super popular topic for a lot of us, is how do we grow our audiences? Has anyone found a specific tactic or a specific thing that's worked for them to grow their audiences?
I have a few ideas, and I'm not, I'm an expert. I don't have like a wildly popular podcast, but I have, I've been to 2 podcast conventions where that is like always the main topic that
Right.
people are always talking about. And some of the biggest things are being as niche as possible in your topic. And they say niches are the riches are in the niches. So like as specific as you can possibly be with your topic and your desired audience. And then using hashtags in your social media promotions that are within that topic, and then joining groups on social media that are interested in that niche, and then not constantly like promoting your podcast within groups on social media, of course, but really engaging in those groups. And then as you start to build a following, start your own group for your podcast. So as your podcast starts to get fans, start like a Facebook group for those listeners, and then they become much more engaged in your podcast, and then they become advocates for it and ambassadors, and they invite their friends, and it becomes a real community.
Hey, guy, Jeremy, I'm wondering, since, based on the results of the poll that we did, before we jump into specific topics, there's a number of people on the call that have never even built a podcast. I'm wondering if we could take just 5 minutes to kind of really talk through the basics of what the process is. You're obviously recording audio or video, then you got to edit something, and then you got to publish it. Let's jump into just 3-4 minutes of the super basics for the people that are coming in completely new.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, so as I mentioned, in the beginning, I probably should have led with this. I apologize. So anyone just getting started with a podcast, you first obviously need a topic, a name, some sort of direction of the theme that you're looking to speak on. But secondly, I try to break it down into 3 categories. The first is recording your podcast. So thinking of ways that you're going to be able to record your episode. And there's multiple ways to do that, right? So you can be as sophisticated as going into a studio and recording in, kind of a radio setting and be more professional, like I mentioned, with like a sound system and everything. Or you could be as simple as recording on your phone. You can use simple apps that will record, and using Zoom as some of you have mentioned as well, and other applications to record. So that's really step 1, right? Is to try to record your audio, try to record your interview, so that you have something to share. Secondly, after that, you want to edit your podcast, right? So you want to take out all of the ums, or to take out all of the spots where you don't find applicable, add specific sounds and or intros and outros to your podcast, trying to spice it up. So after you record, you're going to then try to edit your podcast. And once you have a final product, once you have a final piece, whether that's a video podcast or just simply audio, you're going to want to upload that to, there's multiple different clients out there that will allow you to upload your episode, and you can start those pretty much for free. I've used Audio Bloom in the past. There's Podbean, there's multiple ways where you can upload your audio, which will then allow you to share your podcast and share your episode. So that's just kind of a step-by-step how I try to think of, recording, editing, and then uploading and sharing. And obviously there's a lot of little caveats in between all of that, but that's the basic premise for, trying to get your podcast up and running. Does that help, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only other question on the basics side is, once you upload it to a platform like Podbean,
right,
that distributes to different outlets. And
correct.
Are there, what are the things on each platform to look for when making a decision where to ultimately host your podcast? And this is something, that would be something for the group.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, that's an important piece, right? You want your podcast to be on iTunes. You want your podcast to show up on Spotify. And a lot of those clients, a lot of those services like Podbean, Audio Bloom that I've used will allow you to seamlessly link to those outlets, and allow you to automatically, once you upload your episode, distribute that out so that you can go to Spotify and see your podcast, name the title, give your podcast that profile image, and you're kind of off and running from there. So that's a good point. The distribution part is important, and they make it so seamless now that it's pretty much once you upload and you're logged in to your account, it'll automatically do that for you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And yeah, Todd has a question in the chat. Do the services, well, one, are they free or do they cost something? And
Yep.
two, where do you find the metrics? Like, how do I know how many people watched on Spotify versus iTunes? How many people watched total or listened total? That kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, so downloads and listens those metrics will be readily available to you in those platforms. Depending on how large your audience gets, will determine your cost. I've used Audio Bloom in the past, and it's been free, up to a certain point. So if it's not free, it's relatively inexpensive to start off. Once those metrics are input, you're not going to really see, at least on that platform that I'm using, kind of the differentiating metrics between Spotify, iTunes, etc. It'll just kind of give you an aggregate of everything. How many listens for this episode, how many downloads for this episode. So, which is still helpful. Kind of gives you an overall feel of your audience size, and those metrics are built right into services like Podbean.
Cool. All right, and anybody using anything different? Anybody have different experiences?
Yeah, so I'm using Anchor, Anchor.fm, and when I wanted to start a couple years ago, I was exploring. I really want a system that is as frictionless as possible, and so I was grateful that Anchor came around. But it makes it real easy to record or upload a recording through a different program. But you essentially upload it there. You can even trim it. And then it distributes it to the different networks automatically. And then they've recently rolled out some monetization options, which I have not played with. So that's made it just real easy. They've even added, some library of sound effects and different things that I can use for transitions and whatnot. So, but what's great about using Zoom is Zoom records the video and the audio. So I'll take the audio and I'll upload it to Anchor, and then I'll take my video and I'll upload it to YouTube. And then while it's uploading, I'll write up my description and then I'll post it on both of them. So I really wanted to create a system that was just to streamline it. So I'm a little bit more, I'm more raw in the sense of I'm not editing out all the ums and
Sure.
Whatever I recorded, it is what it is. So as I get more traction, then I can start to do some of those finer touches. But for now, for me, it's just about doing it, getting out there, and then one of the things that I think is helpful for what I'm doing is a lot of the episodes that I do are interviews. And so when I post on social media, I tag those people, and then those people, have their, whoever there's following them on social. And so it helps me to reach beyond my own audience.
That's great. Yeah, so I don't know if everyone can see in the chat. I'd put a link in there to a tool that I've used for recording as well. It's called TriCast or Cast, and you need Google Chrome to use it. It's the only caveat to it, but it's free for up to a certain amount of minutes recording, and I found it to be really great to record different interviews with different people, especially if they're not, right next to you, right? If they're across the country or something like that, it's a great way to connect and do audio interviews that way. In addition, I wanted to bring up probably one of the most famous editing software pieces that's free, and that's Audacity. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this tool. If not, I'll put a link into that as well. And this is a free tool that I think every podcaster starting out should get acquainted with. If you're not, a professional editor, which I know we have some of you on the call, sound technicians and whatnot. This is a tool that I think every podcaster can use as well to not even necessarily get all the ums out, as you were saying, Jason. That's almost like a different level of editing. but it'll at least, allow you to clip in an intro or outro or some transitions and just elevate your level of your recording. So definitely Audacity is another tool, and TriCast are two tools that I've used to help me A, record, and then B, edit. So I don't know if anyone else is using any other tools for editing or for recording, but please chime in if there's anything else that is out there that anyone else is using.
Yeah, I do use Audacity, and that's good. If you also need, because I do video too, if you also need a free video editor, DaVinci Resolve by Blackmagic is a free video editor. So
Cool.
Throw that out there.
Another, a couple of, there's, a ton of different podcast platforms for distributing your podcasts. I've used Buzzsprout and Libsyn. And one nice thing about Libsyn is that from within Libsyn, you can push it out to all your social media accounts. You can schedule it in advance, and it automatically converts an audio podcast to a video. So you can get, you don't have anything on the screen other than your podcast cover art, but it is a video for you can schedule it at the same time that the podcast goes live. It gets pushed out to Facebook and everywhere else as a video file. Which is kind of nice, that some of the other forms don't feature.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I wanted to maybe jump in a little bit with everyone to see, what they are seeing now in our current environment. I think with people being at home more with podcasts, are we seeing, I believe, just 6 months ago, I was reading a lot of data of how podcasts were just exploding, right? Everyone's got one now. Everyone has a voice and a platform. I'm just interested in seeing everyone behavior in terms of being a listener of podcasts and consuming it. What have you all noticed? Has there been maybe with your own podcast an increase in listenership? Has there been a decrease? And what are kind of the challenges with COVID and kind of working from home? Has it maybe been beneficial to you because you are home in your studio and you're able to just record a lot easier than you would be being in an office? I'd love to hear about the environment and how that's impacted and what you all have seen and observed.
Well, Jeremy, I don't have a podcast, but
Yeah.
I have been an avid podcast listener. And I will say, surprisingly enough, for me, my podcast listening has gone down
Okay.
due to COVID, primarily because my commute is non-existent
Yeah.
now. And I
Right.
was using that time to catch up on a lot of the podcasts that I liked. And I still adore those podcasts, and I'm trying to figure out ways to just sit still and integrate them back into my routine. But I noticed a few weeks ago that my listening has gone down tremendously.
No, that's a good point with people not commuting, right? There's no reason to tune in or listen.
I guess I'm
so,
curious, is it Minka? Are you consuming something else? Like, are you watching YouTube? Are you watching movies? Or is it just is that just changed into maybe a completely different type of thing, like work or?
That's a really great question. I think that I have replaced it with much more background, maybe ambient noise. When I listen to podcasts, even though I might be doing something like driving, I felt like it was focused listening because I was really trying to pay attention. Now I'll have just white noise or ambient noise in the background. I haven't increased anything else, my music listening, TV, YouTube, that's pretty much how it was before. I just think that I'm tuning things out more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Anyone else consuming podcasts differently or noticing anything different in just the world of podcasts, or how maybe you're marketed to seeing podcasts?
I'm going to echo Minka's thing. I'm
Yeah.
consuming much less because I'm not in the car as much, and that's
Sure.
between that and like actively walking and stuff like that. But I have noticed, because I am an audio person, I do care about the quality of the audio. And I have noticed that as people have had to shift how they do podcasts, the audio quality has deteriorated, as well as the amount of the difference of topics that people are covering, at least in the podcast that I'm talking about. At some point you don't want to hear more about the pandemic or whatever. And for a long time, people were discussing that. No matter what the podcast was, they were discussing it. So I kind of burned out on that. I didn't necessarily want to get that on my podcast. So I backed off of that because of the content. Slowly getting back into it, and seeing what people are doing in terms of trying to improve the audio quality, like I said, because that does it does get to me sometimes.
Yeah, I think you more than most would probably have the ear for that, but I agree. I think people are in a rush to sometimes get out content rather than really take their time to produce a polished product, right? And so that that especially for you, I think would be a pet peeve, hearing some crackling audio and things like that. But I've just personally myself, I've taken a lot of road trips, on long weekends, and have been able to listen to podcasts and been able to listen to a lot of series there, and that's helped a lot. But thanks. I was just curious, what you all have noticed in the current environment. I think, this being a social media club event, I do want to shift into kind of the marketing of podcasts and what we can do as podcasters or aspiring potential podcasters of how to best market what we do. And I am seeing a big shift from people just recording audio to then going and taking that audio and making a video for YouTube. I don't know if you all have noticed that. Some of you have actually discussed doing that already. But I do believe video in podcasting is kind of the next element, and really another way to elevate and to broaden people's reach. Any other marketing tips or any other marketing ideas that you all have used to just really promote your podcast, whether that's through paid elements like through social or just email lists? What have you all used to grow your audiences? Or what do you all think should we be using to grow our audiences?
Hi, so I actually have been doing, like you mentioned, a lot of social media posting in various platforms. I have, however, one of my biggest issues has been that I have tried to pay for those posts to get boosted, and I've been rejected a lot because of the topics, because my podcast includes obviously politics somewhere in there, and those ads are not getting approved. So that's one of the biggest challenges I'm currently having in the time that we're living.
Yeah, well, that's a completely separate almost issue, because you're talking about the advertising policies and trying to get around that and maybe putting disclaimers on your ads. And I think you're running into a very unique situation there because of politics being a subject of your posts. There are ways around that, and I'm happy to talk to you offline about maybe helping you with that. But I could see how that could be an issue. Anybody else having success? We talked about submitting your podcast to aggregators and directories like Spotify and iHeartRadio and TuneIn and all of these different podcast directories that will take your podcast once you submit it to once you're in an account like Podbean or Audio Bloom or Anchor. Have any of you found any one of these aggregators or directories doing well, better for you? I think the more you can put your podcast in different directories, the better it can be pushed out. Is there anyone publishing their podcasts in specific aggregators or directories that have been really beneficial.
Castbox. We get a lot of listens from Castbox, and I don't really know why.
Huh.
But that's one that we get a lot of listens from there. And there was a time that I had been in touch with them, and they did feature our podcast on one of their so like the Marketing People podcast, they featured it on their marketing podcast page, but it wasn't really for that long, a week.
Sure.
And that was like 9 months ago, so it could be that we got that much traffic just from that time. I think maybe it's just a matter of the way it categorizes our podcast on Castbox, that it's more findable in that platform versus iTunes.
Okay, interesting.
How many directories are there? I never heard of Castbox, Susan, until you just said that.
There's probably 30. There's a lot. Some of them just it just pulls RSS feed from Google. Some of them you have to submit manually. Some of them you have to be approved. And then there's companies like Pandora, that didn't, they just started having podcasts within the last year. So it's growing all the time.
Okay. How do you find them other than the basic ones? Because I guess, like I said, I'm curious of growing the audience. Like I said, I think Apple is doing the best for me so far, but some of the others like Stitcher, Spotify, and iHeart, I literally probably just got on within the last month. And I'm still just trying to figure out how to promote it anyway. I'm just kind of recording, editing on my own as much as I can with Audacity and going right now. So.
Yeah, and William, I posted a link in the chat too, where it kind of gives a list of those directories. So maybe some of those you may have heard of, some of them you may not have, but that might give a good thorough list.
Okay.
For you to kind of check out as well.
I had a question for Susan, because I know Marketing Upheaval has done this recently, where Rudy has gone on other people's podcasts. Has that helped your listenership with cross promotion, where you have somebody from another podcast come on and you go on their podcast?
That's definitely the intention of pushing him out. I promote him. I pitch him to other podcasts.
Right.
There's not a track for sure whether we were found from other people's podcasts.
Right.
There's not really a way to know for sure if that has helped, but it certainly is the intention.
Right. I didn't know if there was a way to track that, or if you saw a blip when things came out. Okay, thanks.
It's hard to tell.
Hey guys, one of the other things that I'm an audio engineer and I identify with Jason. So one of the other things that we've been using is live stream. Live stream right now, people want to be entertained, kind of what you guys were talking about, how we're going away from talking to pandemics and all this economy and all this other stuff. They want to see more of that entertainment piece. So live streaming the podcast as well has helped in terms of, so I produce, and Whitney Mendoza does the hosting. So we stream on YouTube and Facebook, while at the same time we do post-production. So you kind of get to see the raw sense of it. And then if you want to listen to it on your own time, that also helps.
That's great. You really need some polished hosts to, record that in real time live. I don't know if I would be that brave to do that right away, but for people who want to get that live element, I think that's really important too, and a good point. Thanks, Isaac, for that. Yeah, I think people really, especially now, like you said, need to be entertained, want to be entertained, and want to tune into more live. I am seeing that on social more, just live events, whether that's Facebook Live, IG Live, or live stream, as you mentioned, through that service. So really, really good point. And Jason, I'm glad you brought up kind of the cross promotion idea, because that's where I was kind of headed next, of how to, before you jumped in, it was perfect timing about networking with your community And part of networking with the podcast community is kind of what we're doing here this morning, getting those word of mouth recommendations, but also being able to network with other podcasters. Going into Reddit, right, and just looking at other podcasts and connecting with other podcasters that are doing like-minded podcasts. There's support groups out there. There's other meetups and podcaster support, like I said, resource groups, on LinkedIn and stuff like that. And so being able to cross promote is something that we've done on Bill's Wire, just because we're a collection and a network of NFL franchises. There's a Bengals or a Falcons Wire. So if the Bills were playing the Falcons, I would get with their podcast team. And so that's a really popular tactic to grow your audience, is to piggyback off other audiences that are doing like-minded things. So I think if you all can collaborate and partner with other podcasters, that's a big win as well. And Susan, thank you for sharing that. You're right. It's probably not known whether or not that is beneficial in terms of bottom line listeners. But you would think, maybe over time you can aggregate a little bit more data on that. But you would think that would be really helpful, and it is kind of a recommendation to do that.
And if nothing else,
yeah.
links to your website, and it certainly can't hurt.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
One thing I would add in terms of promotion that I do, it's a small thing, but it adds, every small thing adds up, right? Mm-hmm. So I do a post on my website, a blog post, where I embed the audio and the video. And so anyone that comes across the website and checks out recent content, they're going to see it. And then each week I send it out via email. So I've got a list of, about 650 people. So, a chunk of them are going to get the email, and then a small amount are going to actually click, and a small amount of those are going to actually listen. But just doing that consistently over time is another way that I've done it, as well as sharing it on social.
Yeah, we create transcripts of our episode and then post that as a blog post on the website, and so that boosts traffic to the website just in and of itself very significantly, just because as natural
SEO and
interview, you're using keywords, you're getting great SEO. So it's driven a significant amount of traffic to our website, even if people aren't actually listening to the audio, they sometimes, which is just.
That's great. No, that's a really good point about repurposing the content from your podcast, right? There's so many different ways you can use it. You can even chunk it up into bite-sized pieces. If there's like an aha moment or a really great quote or line from an interview that you want to feature on your social, you can take that clip of audio, right, and share that. I think that's a really smart tactic. And another really good point, Susan, to repurpose what you've recorded, because there's so much content there that if you can chunk it up into bite-sized pieces to use on social, that's a perfect way to do that. I wanted to ask you all as well about guests and how to, entice guests to come on your podcast, and then that type of, back and forth, and how to first, lure in and kind of, a lot of us as podcasters starting out are our own producers. We don't have the luxury of having a producer go source out a guest to come on for us. And so just talking about kind of that pitch and that outreach, what have you all used that's helped? I think for the most part, when I'm asked to come on someone else's podcast, I'm honored to be asked to do it. I love to just talk about that. I think the podcast community is very giving in that way, but would love to hear from anyone who has like a template of how they, or some sort of procedure or protocol of how they go to get guests on their podcast.
I use LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn a lot. If there's a specific guest that we want to go after, if I'm not already connected to them, I just shoot them a very short, introductory connection request saying, that you're an expert in this field and we'd love to have you on our podcast. And I send a link. And you know, you can only have so many characters in a LinkedIn connection invitation.
Sure.
So it's harder that way if you're not already connected to them. I've also even gotten a fairly big name on Twitter, where another podcaster, Jay Akunzo, who's got several podcasts about marketing and podcasting for brands. I pitched him on Twitter. He was talking about supporting, you know, other podcasters and in the community. And so on Twitter, I was like, oh, in that vein, would you like to join our podcast? And he said, sure. So I think messaging directly on social media, a lot of podcasters, you know, they're trying to get their name out just as much as you are. And so they're also flattered to be invited to be on other podcasts. And then it's also nice to have like a one sheet, especially for bigger name people, that it's a one sheet that has the basics, what your podcast is, what it's about, who's your audience. That's helpful, so that it makes it more professional and branded, and they see that it's a legitimate thing, and it's not just somebody who, you know, just started a podcast because they were bored this spring and stuck at home.
Yeah, and one thing I'll piggyback on that is I have a friend who works with public speakers, and obviously events are gone. So we got connected, not intentionally, but in that conversation, she has a bunch of speakers and she's trying to figure out how do you help these speakers in the new world, and podcasting would be one of them. So she had 4 of her speakers that I interviewed on my podcast, and so those are people I wouldn't have probably normally interviewed at this early in the journey, but these are people she represents. So I was able to do that, which was a cool win. But if you reach out to speakers bureaus or anyone that works with speakers in some form or fashion, that's also another way to get to them if you can't get through to them directly on a social channel.
That's great. Yeah, no, I think you guys both hit, you know, really good points about the direct messages on Twitter have worked for me. The LinkedIn, I think, adds an element of professionalism. The one pager would certainly do that, Susan. So I think those are all really good points. And let's be honest, we can't necessarily on our own get our podcast elevated if we don't rely on other experts to bring in an interview. I think you need that collaboration and need someone else, you know, and need others to add that expertise and to create your podcast to, you know, make them more interesting. If I were just to talk about the Buffalo Bills, my entire podcast would be kind of boring. But if I have a player or the GM, you know, someone related to, it just adds a level of authority, and that goes for any type of podcast. So I think that's important to really reach for big names. I think, you know, some people might be shy to reach for the CEO or you know, a CMO of a huge company if it's related to marketing for a big organization. But I think the worst they can say is no, right? So I would definitely try to aim high and you know, try to get quality guests on your podcast. I think it's the best way and probably the quickest way to gain more listeners and add a lot of credibility. Have any of you created a dedicated like podcast landing page on your site? I know some of you said you've kind of embedded it on your blog, but have you all gone to the level or to the extent of really dedicated one page of your website or of your brand? Or have you just created a website totally dedicated to your podcast? I think that would be really interesting to know if you all have done that, because I think that would also elevate your credibility. You know, you can put like links to your recent episodes, testimonials, and quotes. You can really kind of build out your entire marketing landscape with your podcast if you're able to do that. I was just curious if anyone had gone to those lengths yet.
I'll jump in. I'm actually just kind of getting started on my podcasting journey, and we're trying to figure that piece of it out. That's one strategy sorry?
Oh, I was just saying, sure. Yep.
And this kind of dovetails maybe into monetization, But whether or not we have an existing website with the podcast, if we don't have that, we were thinking about just using a URL and using that to push to Patreon, which I don't know if anybody else is using. But that's kind of where we were hoping to consolidate all of our content, give people first access, and then also incentivize them for additional content. So I don't know. We're trying to figure out whether or not that's the appropriate way to go, or if a standalone website would enhance what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to maybe the amount of content you all plan on producing, and if you have enough that you think you can stand up a website on its own, even if it's just kind of a micro site, right, with just a couple of pages and dedicated toward that URL, kind of mimicking the name of the podcast. I think that'd be really the way to go. And I'm glad you brought up monetization because, at the end of the day, I think we do this a lot because we all like to do it. But, for some of us and for some clients or just our own brand or our own goals as entrepreneurs, we're looking to monetize and to kind of, make a little money while doing it too. So I'm glad you brought up that point. And is anyone engaged in any sponsorships yet, or has anyone done anything that have really tried to monetize our podcast? We're solely for clicks to get people to the website. So there's that kind of incentive for us to just get as many listeners as possible. But I'm wondering if anyone has dipped their toes into the traditional sponsorships, the cost per 1,000 basis. If I've seen some podcasts, it's $18 per 1,000 downloads for maybe a pre-roll mention at the beginning of your show. And has anyone really done anything like that to monetize?
I plan to. I've set the groundwork for dinner tonight Atlanta to monetize. It's just that I I put it on hiatus because it's all about going out to restaurants, and people aren't doing that so much other than pick up orders. And so I'm trying to figure out how to shift it for the future and start it back up again. But I started doing pro bono sponsorships to sort of lay the groundwork. So that I contacted some people that I know that are in the food related industry and created 15-second spots for them on each episode, just to sort of set the stage of what it can do. And once that's sort of gone, I can it's sort of a prove that it works kind of a thing. And then I'll start going after actual paid sponsorships. And I don't plan to use the CPM model, cost per thousand.
Okay.
Because I think, especially for a niche, it can be monetized so much more than that. You get so much more engagement with listeners than you do. It's not an equivalent model. You get so much more intimacy with podcasts and so much more engagement with your audience that I think you can make so much more money and add so much more value, and you can really make it worth a sponsor's money and time, and get so much more engagement, and you can charge more than that. I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot of podcasts that are all about that.
Yeah, especially if you create like a fixed fee and they're like the sole sponsor, right? For your niche, you can kind of give them that exclusivity. And it's something, as local as Atlanta or as niche as just marketing, you can, kind of set them apart and propose that sponsorship opportunity for them in a way that, other large volume podcasts, right, are just, like you said, going by the CPM model. And it's not all apples to apples, depending on which podcast you are hosting. So that's really an important point. Anyone else at least trying to, even if it's for free, offering sponsorships or ways to monetize their podcast right now?
On mine, it happened very organically. I wasn't intending to because I had just started it, but I had people reach out and wanting to get me some of their product to try and talk about. And at first I
Okay.
was like, oh, this sounds like, the influential thing. Maybe I don't want to do that. But then it was really great. Like Kaivan Foods, for example, reached out and they just wanted to talk about their product. And their owner is one of the former NFL players. He came on the podcast. We talked about food. We talked about life. And he sent me some products to try out. And it was really great. And then Benny, another drink that's an LGBTQ owned. And I had an LGBTQ interview. He just wanted me to have that drink while we were talking about it. They didn't even want to come on. They just wanted to show support for the podcast.
Sure.
And I was like, I appreciate that. So that's been good. And then just to kind of bring some money in, I want to have like its own account because expenses come with podcasts, like equipment and subscriptions and all of that. I am doing some content, helping with content such as the podcast for a company that's not even related to my podcast, but the money that comes in is towards the podcast. So that's kind of like a trade type of thing, just to kind of keep up with expenses with the podcast.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, if it happens that organically, that's great. That happened for you.
Yeah, it was way too early. I think it was just a salesperson within me.
Yeah. No, that's excellent. Thanks for sharing.
So I produce Dick South, which is Southpot. They have Oracle as a sponsor and different other big companies. But what they did first, they built it up so a year or two, and then they start offering sponsorships. So if you're starting a podcast and you don't find sponsors yet, just don't get discouraged because it takes time. So, and good content, obviously.
Right. No, I think that's a good point. Stick with it. Show a little bit of longevity because so many people jump into a podcast and then fade out, right? So they want to see that that commitment from you. So I think that's good in building an audience. So good point. We didn't really get an opportunity to talk about equipment too much, just because it's so vast. As you all know, you can record something as simple on your iPhone or handheld device, or you can be in a studio setting. But just for myself, using a USB microphone has been helpful. Blue is a very popular brand. What have you all found to be at least a setup that you can explain rather simply, if that's possible, to help someone here who is not start a podcast? What have you found to be a good, easy setup for you? For me, it's been a laptop, TriCast, a USB microphone, a good pair of headphones. Has been that simple for me. But just curious what you all have dabbled into in terms of equipment, or anything that you would recommend to someone starting out with equipment.
I'll go. So one of the things that is very easy is the audio interface, which I don't know if Jason is familiar with this one. Is the Focusrite. Any audio interface, it runs for about $100 or $200. And then I do recommend a really nice mic, which is the SMB7. It's a Shure, SHURE. And those two things can be adapted to Zoom or any other platforms, and you'll get a nice audio sound. It is good. A standard class for industry. So.
Yeah, I agree. The Focusrite is for if you're doing one microphone at a time. The Focusrite Solo is a pretty good start. You're talking about an XLR connected microphone, so it's a little bit better grade from USB, at least most USBs. So it's kind of that next step up. For marketing upheaval, which I worked with Susan and Rudy, they needed to record two microphones at the same time. They wanted to be at a table conversing with each other. Right. So, and it needed to be portable in some way and fairly easy. So I recommended a Zoom H6 recorder, or an H5 would work as well, coupled with coupled with a couple Audio-Technica microphones, I think the 2020, and then just little mic stands, little tabletop mic stands and a couple cables. And you basically have a portable unit, runs on batteries. You don't necessarily need the whole computer and screen and everything. And you can record that way in any location. And it needs to be adapted a little bit if you're going to record somebody via phone or something like that. But for, before we were all confined to our homes and you could actually be at the same table with each other, it was a pretty good and efficient setup to start off with.
No, we appreciate that expertise from you all because, getting started, a lot of us are, on the creative side or in the marketing side and don't necessarily have that technical expertise to understand what creates good sound. And so, that was really helpful. And thank you, Isaac, for putting that in the chat, and Jason for all that expertise on that front. That's important to get quality sound in your podcast. So we're after 9 o'clock. I'm free to continue the conversation with everyone. If there's anything else, any last minute things that we want to discuss, we can go to about 9:15, 9:30 if you all want. If not, we're happy to end it now and let you all get on with your Thursday. But please let me know if there's anything that Social Media Club can do, anything that I can do to help you all get started with your podcast or help promote your podcast. And I hope that we can all use this group that chatted today to be a resource for each other as we kind of navigate this interesting time period we're all living in. So again, I just want to thank everyone for joining this morning. If there's not anything else that you all wish to discuss, we can adjourn, and we'll be sure to share kind of the group chat. And this was recorded as well. So, if there's anyone that wants to go back and see any of this, we can, send you the recording of this morning's session so that you can get some of the technical names and microphones and whatnot that may have slipped by some of us. Anyone else have anything else to say? Any final thoughts? No. All right. Well, thanks again. Just be on the lookout for Social Media Club for our next Coffee and Content here. Like we mentioned, and Brian mentioned, really in the first half of the first part of our session, we're going to probably primarily stick to this type of virtual format until the new year. But be on the lookout in your inboxes for our next Coffee and Content next month. And just really appreciate everyone coming on this morning and chatting podcasts with all of us. And you have a great Thursday and great weekend, and happy early 4th of July to everybody.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks
Yeah.
all.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.